I'm coming home. Coming home.
The sun had not yet risen over the quiet fishing village when the first sounds of morning began to stir. The gentle splash of waves brushed against the wooden stilts of old houses, and a soft mist curled above the shoreline like a thin blanket trying to protect the world from the coming day. In that sleepy stillness, a little boy slowly made his way toward the water, holding an old radio to his chest as if it were something fragile. His name was Elian, a 9-year-old Filipino boy with a face that held stories far older than his years. His small steps left faint marks on the damp sand, each print filled with determination. He wore the same worn-out slippers he'd used for 2 years, the straps held together with a thin piece of fishing line. Yet he walked with the confidence of someone who believed that even broken things could still carry dreams. The village still slept, but Elian's day began earlier than most. The ocean had always been the first to hear his voice. He stood by the edge of the water, staring at the calm horizon, and pressed the radio's play button. The speakers crackled with static before releasing a soft melody, old, shaky, but familiar. The boy listened for a moment, then closed his eyes and let the rhythm settle inside his chest. His mother, Maria, watched from a distance near their small bamboo hut. Her tired eyes followed her son with a longing that only a mother living in poverty could understand. She knew he did not sing for applause or recognition. He sang because life had left him with very few ways to fight back. His voice was his courage, his escape, and sometimes, the only thing that helped him forget the hunger that visited their home more often than hope did. With the first light of dawn breaking across the sky, Elian began to sing. His voice rose gently, blending with the sound of the waves. It carried the rawness of a child who had seen too much, yet still believed in something beautiful. The afternoon sun rested gently over the village when Maria received a message that would shift the direction of their lives. It came from Rodel, her older brother living in California, a man known for his quiet kindness and simple hopes. For years he had driven a taxi through crowded streets, saving small amounts of money to send home whenever he could. But this time, he had done something different, something bold. He had taken a shaky video of Elian singing by the shore and submitted it to a show none of them had ever imagined reaching, America's Got Talent. The email arrived unexpectedly, carrying words that made Maria's hands tremble. It wasn't just a reply. It was an invitation. News spread through the fishing village faster than the tides. Children ran barefoot across narrow walkways, shouting Elian's name with sparkling curiosity. The elders paused from cleaning their fishing nets, whispering in disbelief. Mothers gathered in small circles, their eyes softening with pride. For a village where dreams often faded before they even began, this felt like a miracle. But miracles still needed money. And money was something they did not have. Yet, in a way only communities built on love understood, everyone contributed. A fisherman sold a portion of his morning catch at a lower price so buyers would take more. A neighbor brought a small jar of coins she had saved for a roof repair. A group of children gave up the few pesos they had collected from selling seashells to tourists. No one questioned whether their contribution was enough. They simply gave. Days later, Maria and Elian stood at the small airport, clutching 2 worn-out bags that carried nothing more than clothes, a few snacks, and a dream too big for any luggage. The flight felt endless. The seats were stiff, and the air smelled unfamiliar. But Elian kept his eyes glued to the window. He watched the clouds drift like floating mountains, glowing in the sunlight. For the first time in his life, he saw the world from above, from a place where his problems looked small, and his dreams looked possible. The moment Elian stepped into the vast auditorium, his small frame seemed to shrink even further. The lights above glowed like stars caught inside metal cages, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Every sound, from footsteps to distant cheers, echoed through the air like a reminder of how far he was from the quiet shores of home. He held the microphone with both hands, gripping it the way a child might cling to a lifeline. The judge's table stood ahead like a wall of expectations. Faces known around the world watched him with a mix of curiosity, uncertainty, and the calm patience of people who had seen thousands before him. Yet none of those faces were familiar to Ilian. They felt larger than life, almost unreal. Beyond them, the audience stretched endlessly. Rows and rows of strangers sat in the darkness, breathing the same anticipation, waiting for something they didn't even know they needed. The room buzzed with whispers, soft, speculative, doubtful. To many, he looked too small, too fragile, too young to change anything. Ilian felt his heartbeat drum against his ribs, each thump echoing louder than the last. The stage seemed to breathe around him, the way a giant inhales before deciding whether to embrace or swallow someone whole. For a moment, fear wrapped tightly around his chest, threatening to silence him before he even began. But then he remembered the ocean. He remembered the waves that had listened without judgment. He remembered the mornings when the sky turned gold while he sang to survive. He remembered Maria's tired smile, shaped by hope and sacrifice. That memory steadied him. Slowly, he closed his eyes. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. The judges grew still. The camera light blinked, capturing every second as if the world might need proof later. The silence deepened, thick, heavy, powerful. It wasn't the silence of doubt anymore. It was the silence of possibility. A moment suspended between who Ilian had been and who he was about to become. Then, with a breath that carried the weight of his entire life, he prepared to release the one thing the world could not anticipate, his voice. The first note left Ilian's lips like a fragile whisper, trembling in the air as if unsure whether it belonged on a stage so grand. But the moment it drifted into the silence, something shifted, subtly, deeply, undeniably. The room, once filled with restless anticipation, grew impossibly still. His voice carried a softness that felt almost too pure for a place of spotlights and cameras. It rose slowly, unfolding like a small flower discovering sunlight for the first time. Every note shimmered with the ache of a child who had lived through storms yet still believed in hope. As the melody deepened, the audience leaned closer without realizing it. The judges, who moments earlier wore expressions of casual interest, now sat frozen, eyes widening with every rise and fall of his fragile voice. There was something in the way he sang, something unpolished, untrained, but beautifully honest. It was the kind of honesty people forgot existed. Ilian sang about loss. About the father the sea had taken from him. About nights spent waiting for footsteps that would never return. About the weight a little boy carried when a family depended on him to keep dreaming. His voice cracked slightly in the middle of a high note, not from weakness, but from truth. That single crack struck the audience harder than any perfect performance ever could. It reminded them of the human behind the sound, a child who had known pain far earlier than he should have. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. A man further back wiped his face discreetly, hoping no one would notice. Even the cameras, usually steady and emotionless, seemed to tremble slightly as they captured the moment. And as Ilian poured his heart into the final verse, the song transformed into something greater than itself. It became a prayer, a delicate plea carried by the voice of a boy who had learned to be brave long before he learned to be happy. By the time his last note faded into the air, the room was no longer the same. Something inside it had shattered, softened, awakened. A whole world had begun to cry. When the final note left Ilian's lips, it drifted gently into the space above him, hanging there for a moment as though unwilling to disappear. The auditorium remained silent, so silent it felt unreal. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from confusion or hesitation, but from hearts that had been moved too deeply to react. Ilian kept his eyes lowered, unsure of what to do next. His small chest rose and fell with slow breaths, each one trembling from the weight he had just poured out. He wasn't thinking about applause or approval. He was thinking about home, about the waves that once carried his voice before anyone knew his name. Then, slowly, the silence broke. Someone in the upper balcony wiped their face. A few sniffles echoed softly in the air. The judges stared at Elian with expressions that didn't fit into any category the show usually displayed, no judgment, no calculation, just raw human emotion. Simon Cowell leaned back for a moment, as if struggling to steady himself. Something about the boy's voice had loosened a piece of him he didn't expect. Something old. Something tender. Something he never allowed the world to see. And then he stood. He didn't hurry. He didn't speak. He simply walked toward the golden buzzer with a calmness that made the audience lean forward in disbelief. Elian lifted his head just enough to see Simon's hand hover over the button, hesitant, emotional, transformed. In the next instant, the world erupted. The golden buzzer lit up, exploding in a burst of light. A thunderous sound filled the hall, and golden confetti rained from the sky like blessings falling from heaven. The crowd rose to their feet, cheering, crying, clapping, not because of talent alone, but because of the purity of a child who sang with his soul. Maria collapsed into her hands backstage, tears streaming down her face. Her heart felt too full, too overwhelmed, too grateful to contain everything happening at once. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer had led to this moment. Elian stood beneath the golden rain, his face tilted upward. The confetti touched his skin softly, like a promise, like a beginning, like something the universe had always meant for him. In that shining moment, his life changed forever.